So good afternoon and welcome, Peter. This is the GMC April membership meeting. I'm David Lubar, chair of the GMC. Let me begin by welcoming a number of our special guests today, beginning with Mayor Tom Barrett, Reggie Moore from the Office of Violence Prevention, Deanna Tillish from UPAP, Jeanette Kowalik, City Health Commissioner, and State Representative Evan Goyke, right over here. So just to give you a brief rundown of today's program, we'll hear from Mayor Barrett, who will be giving us an update on the 2020 DNC convention coming here to Milwaukee. Following that, we will hear from Jeanette Kowalik, the City Health Commissioner, and then we will hear from Reggie Moore, Director of Office of Violence Prevention. And just to give you a little background, in 2016, the OVP, as they call it, along with the steering committee, developed the Blueprint for Peace, which was funded through a generous grant from the Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment at the Medical College of Wisconsin. The Blueprint for Peace steering committee included GMC members Dan Bader, Alan Gilligan, Dancia Strong-Hill, Julia Taylor, Peggy Troy, and Mary Lou Young. And so in January of 2018, the OVP launched 414 Life. Excuse me, that was in December 2018, is that correct? In December of 2018, 414 Life. 414 Life was shaped after Peer Violence, a nationally recognized and proven model in violence interruption. So 414 Life was made possible with financial and community support from the City of Milwaukee, Bader Philanthropies, Greater Milwaukee Foundation, Amy and Fred Crone, the GMC, and Les Weil, and others among you who have been champions of that approach. Following Reggie, we will hear from a panel which includes Dr. David Milia, Director of the Freighter Trauma Program, 3 of the staff members of 414 Life, and Marcus McAllister from Cure Violence. The panel will be moderated by Peggy Troy, President of Children's Hospital. So that's today's program. I'd like to begin with Deanna Tillish, President and CEO of UPAP, to talk about the 2019 campaign. The campaign has been growing quite a bit under Deanna Tillish, and I had the experience of being a co-chair of the campaign the first year she took this position. Deanna?
And David trained me well on how to fundraise. So, well, good afternoon. And it is such a pleasure to stand before a group of individuals and leaders that I know understand the role that UPAP has played over the last 52 years in ensuring the best in music, dance, and theater. You hopefully did hear the Milwaukee Symphony perform. I think they serve as a perfect example of how these dollars are critically important. UPAP has a proud legacy of being Milwaukee made, with all dollars invested staying right here in southeastern Wisconsin. So now, while UPAP is best known for raising and distributing dollars, which is critically important to our member groups, we are also deeply committed to making the performing arts available to all that wish to experience them. And it is for this reason that UPAP Connect, a community outreach program, was created to ensure that everyone who so desires has access to these critical assets. There is information about UPAP Connect at your table, so please feel free to take a look at it. What I would like to just briefly share with you today is one outcome of this program that underscores how exposure to the arts can be truly life-changing. One of our UPAP Connect partners is Penfield Children's Center and Montessori Academy, which serves children ages 6 months to 9 years old. Many of these children have special needs. Most of the families live at or below the poverty level, so access to the arts is limited to non-existent. Fortunately, because of UPAP Connect and funding from Harley-Davidson, children at Penfield and their families have been immersed into the performing arts. They've been able to experience the Milwaukee Ballet, the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, dance works, and the Florentine Opera, which I might add does a wonderful rendition of The Three Little Pigs. As a mother of a child with special needs, I know firsthand the importance of the arts, particularly music, for sensory development. Now, some of the children at Penfield are nonverbal. So when the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra was leading a sing-along during a recent visit, no one expected these children to participate. So imagine the surprise of parents and teachers when they quickly learned that a child that is unable to speak can often sing. It was a moment to behold when a parent heard their child's voice for the very first time because of their exposure to music. But the Penfield story doesn't end there. After experiencing different aspects of the arts delivered by our member groups, Penfield Montessori teachers took it upon themselves to create a musical performed by the students for their families. It has been the most attended event during this school year. So the performing arts do more than entertain. They bring people together. They create lifelong memories, particularly for a parent who's just heard their child's voice for the first time. And they inspire us all. If you have been inspired by this story and believe in the value of the performing arts as a community asset, please consider supporting the 2019 UPAP campaign, which is currently underway. For those of you who have already contributed, and I know many of you already have who are in this room, we greatly appreciate your commitment to ensuring entertainment excellence and making a difference in the lives of many. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanna. UPAP is important in our community. Thank you for sharing that story, and I urge everyone to do their best to support UPAP, which supports our entire community. So Julia Taylor normally gives this part of the program. She injured her knee, so it's too difficult for her to stand here. So I will be giving you an update on the first quarter initiatives of the GMC. So let me begin with economic prosperity. Under economic prosperity, we have Scale Up Milwaukee, which recently launched the application for its 6th cohort of the Growth Accelerator. Businesses with exportable products or services and annual revenue of 1 to 10 million are urged to apply. The University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, UWM, the UWM faculty will again be teaching Scale Up Milwaukee and helping these companies grow and prosper. To date, there have been 71 companies that have graduated from the program in the first 5 cohorts, and they are currently experiencing about a 23% annual average growth rate. So the program clearly works, and again, if you know of companies that would be interested, please ask them to apply. In March last month, Scale Up hosted a program called Meet the Masters, And for the March program, Amanda Baltz, CEO of Spalding Medical, which is a company that spun off of Spalding Clinical, which went through Scalerator. She was the master. So that's simply an example of a company that is experiencing significant growth and success. Under innovation and talent, it says here, we hope you have some room for your calendar. And that's because there's a lot going on under innovation and talent. The Commons has a spring full of events, including their biannual Skills and Accelerator Demo Day on April 23rd. The Commons team has been hard at work with Milwaukee and Startup Milwaukee, facilitating the first CoLab cohort, which is a civic accelerator with participants working on community projects in the Mitchell Street, Avenues West, and Granville neighborhoods. On April 24th, that cohort will present their high-impact solutions to real community problems at a program called The Big Impact, and we encourage you to attend this event. A link to register was sent in the most recent newsletter, so it's in your emails, or you can contact Maggie at the GMC. In addition, the Commons team on the 24th is hosting their first Hackett Bracket in Madison, which is a program for creating innovative ways to drive adaptation for climate change. I'm proud to share, in addition, that Southwest Airlines awarded the GMC and our partners Bradley Tech High School and Milwaukee Area Technical College a portion of a $1 million charitable grant to fund the expanding Milwaukee's aviation pipeline project. So interestingly, more than 24,000 people are employed in Wisconsin by companies that support the aerospace manufacturing sector and aircraft, spacecraft, and its parts, which altogether make up the 7th largest category of Wisconsin exports. So it's 24,000 people. So this grant from Southwest Airlines is very important to continuing to support that sector. In addition, another program that's continuing this year, Milwaukee has once again been invited to participate in Harvard's Young American Leaders Program this June, along with 14 other cities. Nominations were solicited from a variety of sectors, and with the help of a selection committee comprised of GMC members, 10 local leaders were chosen for this opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and participate. So the group will learn how to improve inclusive cross-sector collaboration to help our city prosper, with the goal of implementing real action after the program. Last year's cohort remains plugged in with the GMC leadership and staff because they're all younger people. And we continue to explore different aspects of the workforce that they can support. So special thank you to people on the selection committee, and again, Southwest Airlines for sponsoring the group's travel, and Grafe for sponsoring the cost of housing. Actually, they're going to Harvard, not to Washington, D.C. Thank you very much. So under Vibrancy of Place, on February 12th, the GMC hosted the Shared Prosperity Partnership event with the Kresge Foundation, Living Cities, the Brookings Institute, and the Urban Institute, and local leadership. Local and national experts discussed creative ways to pool capital for neighborhood and community investment, including specifically with respect to Milwaukee, a $50 million catalytic neighborhood fund for MKE United. So that was a very positive event hosted by the Bradley Foundation, or the Bader Foundation. In addition, under this category, Vibrancy of Place, we recently received the plans for the next iteration of the Beer Line Trail and are developing a fundraising plan to complete that phase. Riverworks Development Corporation is also finalizing for this summer programming along the trail, which will aid in creative placemaking efforts and community engagement along the trail. So with all of that, those are the key activities and highlights of the GMC. You can see even in the polar vortex, the GMC has been very busy working on all of our high priorities and initiatives. So I want to thank all the volunteers and the staff that participated in all those activities. I'd like to now ask Mayor Tom Barrett to share some thoughts about the Democratic National Convention.
Thank you very much, David. Good afternoon. I will share some thoughts about the Democratic National Convention. I am pumped. This is very, very exciting, and this is a game changer for our city. And just to take the partisan politics out of it, here's my goal. My goal is that we pull off this convention, and that Friday morning, July 17th, 2020, all the delegates who are leaving the city say, wow, that was a great experience. And then we immediately start planning for the 2024 Republican convention here in Milwaukee. Just so you know that I'm bipartisan when it comes to trying to attract these conventions. But let me tell you why I think this is so important for our city. This is the first time in the history of the city, going back to 1846, first time in the history of the state, going back to 1848, when a national political party is holding its convention, a major political party is holding its convention here in the city of Milwaukee. So this is a big deal. To sort of put this into scale, I was talking to one of the reporters from Channel 4 2 weeks ago, and he was telling me that NBC, MSNBC, and CNBC, or whatever the third one is, are planning on having 500 people here for this event. You put the spotlight on this city, both in a positive sense and quite honestly in a negative sense, for 4 days. This is going to be the epicenter of political journalism throughout this nation. And so we have both an opportunity and a challenge before us. The opportunity, of course, is to let people know what an incredible gem we have here. And the challenge, of course, is that we have to continue, not just because there's a convention coming, that's probably the worst reason to do it, but to face the very difficult challenges that we face in this city pertaining to poverty, pertaining to housing, pertaining to public safety, pertaining to public education, because the spotlight will be on us. But I would be remiss if I didn't just take a second. What I have learned in this experience is two things. One, we've run a marathon race to get to the starting line, because that's where we are right now. We're at the starting line, and now between now and July 17th, it's going to be an Ironman or Ironwoman competition to pull this off. The other thing I've learned, again, now that we've won the bid, is that success has many parents. I think we all know failure is an orphan, but success has many parents, and that's rightfully so, because there were so many people that allowed us to get to this point, including some people in this room who stepped up in a very, very significant way, and I want to thank you for that. I think what happened here was the stars aligned in the right way. There were a wide range of issues that allowed this to happen. I think that included in those were you certainly had a city that wanted to have this happen. Sometimes a city doesn't want to have it happen. You had an arena group that wanted it to happen. I think you had a political election in December of 2018 that made it more attractive. And you had the fact, quite honestly, that Hillary Clinton never came to Wisconsin in 2016. So I think all of that played into it, plus the fact that the chairman's wife grew up here. I think that didn't hurt either. But for whatever reason, it's coming here. And I will just share, just for 30 seconds, the part that I took the most enjoyment in. When they came here back in July, they bring this group of about 18 people to scour the city. And we had a meeting over at U.S. Bank up in the Foley and Lardner offices. And as we were coming in, as I was driving in and we were parking the car, I had this little flash in my mind. I wonder when they have been here last to the Midwest, the Democrats. So I literally Googled Democratic National Convention. You could do this, and you'd get the same results I got. And what it showed was the Democrats were in Chicago in 1996. They were in Chicago in 1968 for the famous one. And every time they've come to the Midwest, they've come to Chicago, basically. And so I'm going through the list. And I'm thinking, okay, when was the last time they came to the Midwest other than Chicago? And the answer is 1916, they were in St. Louis. So you have to go all the way back to 1916 to find a Democratic National Convention that came to the Midwest other than a city, other than Chicago. So I immediately went to the Republican National Convention, and they've been to Cleveland, they've been to Kansas City, they've been to St. Paul. So we're in the meeting, and I'm making the pitch, as is other people are making the pitch, and I make this point. The last time the Democrats were in the Midwest other than Chicago was 1916. And I can see the people who are running the show writing this down. And I'm thinking, yes, write that down. So fast forward to the announcement 2 weeks ago, and the press release came out, the national press release came out saying the Democrats have chosen Milwaukee as a site of their 2020 convention. And the next sentence, the second sentence in the national press release was, this is the first time the Democrats will be in the Midwest since they were in St. Louis in 1916. And I thought, thank you for my extensive research that allowed us to get this here, whatever it is, whatever it takes. So we are going to be looking for a lot of assistance for our corporate partners, for venues, hotel rooms. But this is, again, it's a game changer. And what this allows us, this now puts us on the plane to get a Republican convention, to get the Final Four. Other conventions that have not looked at Milwaukee will now look at our city. And again, it allows us to highlight our strengths and also have people look at our challenges, which is my segue just to say a brief word about what we're going to talk about on this panel. Clearly, we all recognize that one of the challenges we have in the city is the poverty, the housing, and the public safety concerns. And we spend some $300 million each year on public safety here in the city of Milwaukee through our police department. But what we have increasingly became concerned about and aware of is the need to have more of a public health approach to public safety. That the conditions, the circumstances, the trauma that leads to safety concerns cannot all be addressed by our police department. And we need to find a way to interrupt the activities that lead to the negative behavior that we've seen. So we're going to continue to put a lot of resources into the police department because we think that that's important. But Reggie Moore, working with Jeanette Kowalik in our health department, have developed this public health approach. And it really starts with the Blueprint for Peace, which is a way for us to bring many, many different components of our community together to start addressing the public safety concerns. And I personally think that we're already seeing some fruits of our labor. And so I'm reaching for my phone, not to answer the phone, but to see if I can bring this up very quickly. But just to share this with you, year to date, our homicides are down, let's see, we'll do our non-fatal shootings, are down 23% from last year, and they're down 32% from 2 years ago. That is good news. We want to see both the non-fatal shootings and the fatal shootings obviously down. I think part of this is the police department, part of it is public safety, part of it is the faith community, but we need to have people from the community who can respond to a lot of the challenges that we have on a timely basis, and that's where the interrupters come in. And so we are very, very excited about this. This is, again, very, very gritty work. It's very real. It's very messy, but I think it's something that's important to do. So I hope that you find what you hear today as thought-provoking and challenging as I do, because we know we all want to make this a safer city. So we've got some great news with the DNC. We've got some challenging news with what we're trying to do here. But what I feel is that we're moving the ship in the right direction, and that's what we want to continue to do. So thank you very much, and back to you, David.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and we look forward to the Final Four coming here. Okay, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next two speakers and then the panel. So, as the mayor said, and as I mentioned earlier, City of Milwaukee Health Commissioner Jeanette Kowalik will be addressing us. She began her career as an undergraduate intern with the City of Milwaukee Health Department and was appointed unanimously by the Common Council in September 2018. The commissioner has 17 years of experience in public health and academia, including working in local health departments, nonprofits, and college public health at Bryant and Stratton College in Milwaukee and Benedictine University in Illinois. She is a servant leader who embraces lifelong education and uses those skills to ensure the health and safety of our community at large. Following Jeanette, we'll hear from Reggie Moore on the 414 Life program. As Office of Violence Director, Reggie leads the city's efforts to assess, prevent, and decrease incidents of structural and community violence. The Office of Violence Prevention advances its mission through partnerships that strengthen youth, families, and neighborhoods. In his first year as director, Reggie facilitated the development of Milwaukee's first comprehensive violence prevention plan. As I mentioned earlier, it's called the Blueprint for Peace. His experience stems from an early age, where at the age of 23, he co-founded Urban Underground, a nationally recognized program for building youth leadership through civic engagement and community organizing. In 2002, he was identified as one of 25 national social justice leaders in the United States by Future 500, the first national profile on youth organizing and activism in the U.S. Reggie has volunteered his time with several local and national organizations, including the Milwaukee Public Schools Foundation, Scaling Wellness in Milwaukee, and the Prevention Institute. He also dedicates his life to being a servant leader, social innovator, and a catalyst for change. Following Reggie, then, will be the panel, and the panel includes Derek Rogers, who is the 414 Life Site Director, Ray Mendoza and Tania Liddell, both 414 Life Violence Interrupters that the mayor mentioned, Marcus McAllister from Cure Violence, Dr. David Milia, who's trauma surgeon and medical director of Level 1 Trauma Program at Freighter, and that will all be moderated by Peggy Troy. So, Jeanette, you're up. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. All right. So the City of Milwaukee Health Department is committed to eliminating violence through a preventive standpoint, as well as cultivating a variety of partnerships across the city, including with our local police department, our sheriff's department, faith-based community, and other partners. One thing I want to highlight is how we look at violence as a public health issue. And you may have heard this buzzword, social determinants of health. What does that mean? Social determinants of health are basically the drivers behind health outcomes. So when we look at health, oftentimes we look at it from a clinical perspective, or like preventing by providing something like an immunization or vaccination. But we want to get to the point of looking at what is going on in people's communities, what is going on in people's households, even looking at trauma that people have experienced as to why do they do what they do. And so we're looking at these various perspectives as to why, as opportunities to intervene. One thing that we also want to stress too is that it's unrealistic for us to anticipate or expect the community to focus on preventing violence if we're not addressing social determinants of health. If people are struggling, if they're like, well, how am I going to pay my rent? Or where's my next meal coming from? they're more of in crisis mode. So how can they move forward with making better decisions and moving from a place of crisis to a place of hope? So I also want to talk about some of the national initiatives that are happening that help to support the work that we're doing in local public health. So this year is the first time in history that the American Public Health Association, also known as APHA, adopted a policy statement on violence as a public health issue. And they called on local health departments to see violence prevention as an essential component to promoting health within its sphere of influence and responsibility. The city of Milwaukee is ahead of the curve in this regard. And I also want to highlight, too, with the APHA, that I have been very involved with this organization for over 10 years. And I currently serve as the chair of the Health Administration section, which pretty much is all of the health officers and commissioners across the country. And the year before last, this whole initiative to make this policy statement did not go through the previous year. There was a lot of tension, a lot of disagreement across the governing council or the various individuals that represent the American or the various sections of the American Public Health Association. So the fact that it took a year for this to go through and then another year for it to get passed is very significant. APHA also called on the hospital systems to engage in efforts to detect signs of violence and trauma and ensure appropriate referrals of services and treatment. Health worker interactions with individuals provide opportunities to screen for violence, past exposure to violence, or behavioral problems that may lead to violence. This partnership does this and more, and we are excited about this effort and expanded partnership with local hospitals. Again, we can't do this in a silo. We all have to work together, and we're very committed to bringing about change in a collaborative manner. So next I want to introduce Reggie Moore, who is the director of the Office of Violence Prevention. Reggie doesn't sleep, by the way. He works all the time. So his efforts are definitely noticeable because he has been working on this. And Mayor Barrett's support for Office of Violence Prevention and Milwaukee Health Department has been very welcome. So we appreciate your support and continued support to move this work forward. So Reggie will talk a little bit about 414 Life and some of the initiatives that are happening at the Milwaukee Health Department and Office of Violence Prevention. Thank you.
All right. I know how everybody eats and then you kind of get tired and sleepy. So hopefully everybody's still awake. I'm honored to be here. I think the last time I was here was early last year after we had recently launched the Blueprint for Peace. So today I'll give a brief update and we can get to the highlight of our presentation today, which is quite frankly the panel. So I just want to thank you all for being here. So a little bit of background about the Office of Violence Prevention. It's actually been around since 2008. Currently, our focus and our mission is to prevent and reduce violence through partnerships that strengthen young people, families, and neighborhoods. The key word in that mission is partnerships. Everything that we do is in collaboration with community organizations, with philanthropy, and quite frankly, with many of you in this room who are committed to making Milwaukee safer. We staff the Commission on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, which is comprised of law enforcement, the court system, service providers such as Sojourner and Family Peace Center, as well as survivors who are all working to improve how we actually respond and prevent domestic violence in our community. I won't go through all of these, and some of these I actually talk about throughout the presentation because all of the work that we do is informed and guided by the Blueprint for Peace. This is just a quick diagram to kind of show you how our work pretty much overlays these three areas in terms of family, youth, and community, and some of the issues that we work on. I think relevant to this audience, one of the areas that we're looking to increase our work in is workplace violence. And not only looking at in terms of school shootings and harassment, but just understanding how do we build a culture of safety and well-being within the companies that you run or that we support in Milwaukee. And this is something that we've heard not only during the blueprint planning process, but has come up consistently. Given that we spend a lot of our time at work, it should be a place that we all feel safe and supported. But again, looking at family, the work that SWIM is doing and our partnership with that, I think is extremely powerful when we look at trauma in our city and the way that young people are impacted by trauma. And so this diagram, again, also at the top, you see the Blueprint for Peace. And so again, all of our work is undergirded and supported and guided by the Blueprint. Which brings me now to a quick update. So this quick diagram kind of shows you that in 2015, we experienced a significant spike and non-fatal shootings and homicides in the city. And rightfully, the community asked the question, what are we going to do about it? And the mayor was responsive to that question, and the Common Council collectively decided to increase its efforts focused on a comprehensive approach to violence prevention. And the first thing that we did was engage the community in telling us what we should be doing to prevent and reduce violence in the city. And the result of that is the Blueprint for Peace. The vision for the Blueprint is that Milwaukee is a safe and resilient city where the lives of all residents are valued, promoted, and protected. So it was an extensive and aggressive process that took approximately 10 months. We launched the Blueprint exactly 12 months from the date that we actually started the process. We actually launched at Discovery World Museum with about 150 community members. There were 3 youth-focused groups, a survivor forum that actually featured panels of folks who had committed violence in terms of gun violence in particular, as well as survivors of gun violence, and really having an honest and raw dialogue and conversation about what should be real in our community to reduce the likelihood of someone choosing violence as a means of solving a conflict, and then also understanding the impact that gun violence has on survivors. The Greater Milwaukee Committee, along with Children's Hospital, United Way, and others, hosted the Safe MKE Forum. And that forum was an opportunity to bring a broad cross-section of the community together to really have an honest conversation about what does safety really mean. And I've said this before, it's a really low bar to just say our community should be absent of violence. The bar should be set as what does it mean to have a thriving community? And so the Blueprint informs us of not what it means to just reduce violence or stop violence, but understanding that it's the environment, as the commissioner spoke to, and the mayor also contributes to the conditions that we're seeing in the behavior that you see in terms of desperation and despair. We also did a citywide youth survey of over 1,000 young people, and we actually reached young people in group homes. The survey was also administered at Vale Phillips, as well as throughout MPS, where students told us if they were mayor, or if they were leading the city, or if they were a philanthropist, what would they invest in, and what were their solutions to violence prevention? So the Blueprint is also a reflection of their vision and ideas for this city. We did 3 site visits to Oakland, Chicago, and Baltimore, particularly as it relates to visiting some of the Cure Violence sites. There were 5 steering committee meetings, 50 community stakeholder interviews. The mayor's ceasefire Sabbath, we also got input to the draft of the Blueprint. And although ministers are kind, they're extremely honest and raw. And one of the things that they actually added to the Blueprint is the importance of having spirituality as a protective factor. That was something that hadn't been highlighted to the process to that point. And understanding that arts and culture and faith all play a role in helping people, number one, avoid trauma, but also bounce back from it or move through it. We also did a faith leader briefing, community brainstorming, and then we released the Blueprint in 2017. This shows the 10 priority neighborhoods that emerged for the Blueprint. And again, these measures are looking at 2014 through 2016 data of combined aggravated assaults, non-fatal shootings, and homicides. And the most important thing that I want to point out is although we looked at what I call blood measures, we are also working extensively to map and support the assets in these communities. And so it is critically important that you don't walk away looking at this slide and saying, oh my God, these are the areas that I need to avoid. These are the areas that we need to be investing in, that we need to be building in, that we should be opening companies in, that we should be opening after school programs in, or making sure that they're supported and sustained and quite frankly grow. And so these are the 10 neighborhoods that emerged through the process. And so these are many of the areas that we're working in. As you hear from the 4-1 for Life team in a moment, Old North Milwaukee is the area of the city, like northwest side of the city where they're based. But our hope is to actually have 2 other sites in the city as well. These are the 6 goals of the Blueprint. Stop the shooting, stop the violence, promote healing, support children, youth, and families, economic opportunity, strong neighborhoods, and strengthening the capacity and coordination of violence prevention. So I'm not gonna read all of these, so don't pass out right now. So in terms of progress, I'll highlight a few of these, and then I'll talk to you about our priorities for 2019. So over 4,000 blueprints have been distributed locally. 23 of 25 priority sectors have been engaged. What that means is when we look at a cross-section of hospital systems, after-school programs, the business community, there are 25 sectors that we prioritize that we wanted to make sure were informed and engaged in the Blueprint. There are 3 that we're prioritizing for this year that we were not able to reach extensively, at least in the first year, which is early childhood, but the city has an early childhood task force that we'll be partnering with as well. Also looking at housing as well as transit. And so we've been working extensively with the county and briefing all of their department heads as it relates to those areas and how their work aligns with the Blueprint for Peace. There have been 626 editorial mentions of the blueprint, reaching 253 million folks globally. And so when I travel throughout the country, and we have folks in Oakland and other parts of the country talking about the blueprint, saying that they've read the blueprint, that they value the blueprint, that's extremely important. Official adoption by the city of Milwaukee, Milwaukee County, the entire board, as well as the county executive, voted to adopt the blueprint for peace. The Milwaukee Healthcare Partnership, United Way, Greater Milwaukee Foundation, Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment at the Medical College, and the Milwaukee Civic and Safety Commission. And that last commission is actually comprised of Milwaukee residents representing each of the automatic districts. And so those are some of the highlights in terms of the first year of the Blueprint's launch. The other thing actually I want to mention on that previous slide is that the Greater Milwaukee Foundation also established a violence prevention fund at the foundation. So anyone that is interested in supporting or funding the efforts of the Blueprint can do so there. And that is part of the private funding that's been raised to support the 4-1 for Life work. We've expanded the trauma response initiative to the entire fire department, has been trained in trauma, and are beginning to make referrals to children who've been exposed to trauma in our community. That includes children who have witnessed violence, but also who have witnessed overdoses as well. We have partnered with the Greater Milwaukee Foundation and the Reasons for Hope Fund to actually support community-driven projects. And those who aren't familiar with the Reasons for Hope Fund, it was started immediately, actually on the tail end of the Sherman Park unrest. And it was started as a rapid response fund, but the foundation has continued to support resident-led projects. The City of Madison and Dane County has established their own Office of Violence Prevention and have been using the Blueprint for Peace to guide their coalition work. So in terms of Milwaukee being a leader on this issue, not only in Milwaukee, but throughout the state, I think is gaining traction. This particular slide just talks about some of the presentations that we've done. And again, I won't go through all of those, but we've reached over 2,000 residents through these presentations and partnerships. So in terms of the goals, one, we're here today to highlight the 4-1 for Life team. That particular strategy was called for by the community in the Blueprint for Peace. And I know this is really small to see, so I'll read you the highlight of this particular strategy. And it really is about hiring people from the community to be involved in leading violence prevention work, particularly as it relates to interrupting the cycle of violence. The other strategy that I highlighted in here that we'll be launching in partnership with the Comprehensive Injury Center, out at the Medical College, led by Dr. Hargarden, is the Carter model. And that'll be spreading to Milwaukee. It's been piloted in West Dallas, but working with the Census St. Joe's, as well as the Milwaukee Healthcare Partnership. Our goal is to partner with local hospitals to track emergency room data around assaults in the city that may not go reported to the police department. This data is really important because it'll be used to inform some of the response work of the 4-1 for Life team, as well as other community partners to respond to incidents of violence. For example, the police department will let us know that there have maybe been 5 fights in Wall Park, for example, which is on Hampton Avenue. And sometimes, they may get phone calls about responding to that, but many times people may be injured and go to the hospital and never report that to the police department. So we're trying to improve in terms of data coordination around violence prevention, and that's another strategy that's called for, particularly in this goal. For the sake of time, I'm actually just going to highlight one thing per goal. And again, there are copies of the Blueprint, and if you have not read it, I encourage you to read it before you leave. In terms of promoting healing and restorative justice, I talked about the expansion of the Trauma Response Initiative, and so making sure that children who witness violence in our community have access to counseling within 48 hours of that incident to try to break the cycle of violence that we see in our city. Support children, youth, and families. This is one of the biggest goals of the Blueprint. This encompasses everything from after-school programs, domestic violence, sexual assault prevention. A program that I want to highlight here is one that we're piloting called Coaching Boys to Men. We've piloted with about 24 coaches in the city, and they reach about 400 young men who are athletes. And as we know, and how many athletes do we have in the room? Play college ball, high school, currently try to work out in the gym. All right, cool. So in terms of, sometimes as men and some of the messaging and the things that we, are taught in terms of unhealthy masculinity oftentimes can get perpetuated. So we want to use, and we understand that coaches are very powerful mentors. So if we can actually engage them in reaching young men and helping them develop a healthy idea of what masculinity means, also planting seeds and teaching them around consent, around harassment, and being actually standing up and not perpetuating issues of harassment and domestic abuse is what the curriculum is designed to do. So we're having a graduation ceremony of that program in 2 weeks. And so we're really proud of that effort. And we hope to actually expand it in partnership with MPS throughout the entire city. And then also at the state level, they've passed a dating violence curriculum that they're trying to get implemented throughout the state. And I think this would complement that type of work. So those are examples of strategies, particularly within this goal, that are important, among many others. Advancing economic development. Again, those of you who are working in both construction in terms of development, as well as investing, some of the projects that GMC highlighted earlier all fall within this goal. How do we help communities and how do we help residents get access to wealth building, to be able to have access to family sustaining jobs and wages are critically important if we're talking about violence prevention. So hopefully as you're listening to this in terms of talking about social determinants of health, these are very specific strategies that underscores what that means in practice. Oh, sorry, let me go back. So in terms of foster safe and strong neighborhoods, so I'm actually going to show you a very concrete example of this, which was in partnership with a group that's called Stand for Peace. And they implemented this summer in Tiffin Taylor Park. And for those of you who know Ann Kohler, her and her brother grew up in this area. And so they approached the city, the mayor's office, and DC, the Department of City Development, with their interest in trying to do this project in the park. And so we were proud to support this effort. And they had read the blueprint. And they said, you know what, we believe that this project aligns with goal number 5, strategy C. And so basically what that's calling for is addressing blight and safety in parks and rebuilding infrastructure so that play spaces are accessible and friendly to all. The last goal is strengthening capacity and coordination of violence prevention efforts, which is a lot of the work that the Office of Violence Prevention does, and supporting groups like Safe and Sound and others who are working, and also building off of the work, for example, that Children's Hospital through Project Ujima has been doing around hospital-based violence intervention for more than 10 years. And so what does it mean to build a system for violence prevention in Milwaukee is the question that we're working every day to answer, and doing that in partnership with many of the organizations and corporations in our city. So some of the priorities going forward is really looking at, one, launching the Violence Prevention Coalition and Coordinating Council, which is basically the next step for the steering committee, expanding Cardiff and Milwaukee, which I mentioned earlier, raising at least $1 million for the Greater Milwaukee Violence Prevention Fund, in addition to leveraging new funding to Milwaukee through government and federal grants. So we're constantly, again, looking nationally in terms of support and bringing resources to Milwaukee for this work. A critical need is improving data sharing and analytics capacity of the Office of Violence Prevention to support community-based violence prevention efforts, strengthening ongoing capacity building, as well as aligning policy efforts to address trauma, violence, juvenile justice, and criminal justice reform. We'll actually be in Madison, thanks to State Representative Evan Goyke, who's joined us for a presentation on the blueprint and its connection to statewide criminal justice reform in Wisconsin. And then finally expanding hospital-based violence intervention efforts in partnership with the Healthcare Partnership. And I think that's a good segue into the panel. And so I'll ask Peggy Troy to join me at the panel, and if we can give her a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Reggie, and thank you for all you're doing, and thanks, Mayor Barrett. Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you for Reggie for all the wonderful work, and thanks today to the GMC for allowing us to come and talk about a very important topic in our city, where, as you can see, we're starting to make some progress. So I'm going to start out the panel with each one of the panelists answering some prepared questions that we have ahead of time. And Marcus, I'm going to start with you, because you've been a pioneer with Cure Violence in Chicago and have done a lot of work to help us get to where we are today. So what is Cure Violence, and describe its public health approach to how you address the issues of violence?
Excellent, thank you. So my name is Marcus McAllister. As you mentioned, I work for Cure Violence. I've been with the organization now about 15 years. We are founded by a doctor by the name of Dr. Gary Sluckin, who is an epidemiologist who used to work for the World Health Organization for many, many years. When he came back to Chicago in 2000, when Cure Violence was launched, back then it was called Ceasefire. Mm-hmm. We're a NGO that has been ranked number 10 in the world with regards to the top 500 NGOs, and we're number 1 with regards to violence prevention according to the NGO Advisor. It used to be, I think, the Geneva Report. But we look at violence from a health lens. Obviously, our doctor being an epidemiologist and working in places like Africa and Somalia and working on tuberculosis epidemic, and as well as AIDS and cholera. looked at the correlation as violence as having many symptoms as a contagion, many factors with regards to the way it is transmitted from one person to the next, how being exposed to trauma and visualizing and seeing it plays a role. And then it also has epidemic waves. So, it's ebb and flows and starts, something I like to put the example of that things start out small and then they get bigger and bigger. Like I'm using a wave like on a beach, it starts real small and gets bigger and bigger. And if you don't do anything about the small bumps as it gets going, then eventually that wave gets real big and it becomes something serious. So Cure Violence has been using the techniques of a doctor by epidemiologist ways, by having what we call violence interrupters, who they'll speak for themselves on how they've adapted the Cure Violence model here in Milwaukee. But basically interrupting violence before it, being able to identify the highest transmitters. I mean, obviously in the neighborhoods that this model is replicated at, most of the people in the neighborhood, I mean, they know who has the capacity to not only be violent, but have experienced violence, and being able to try to work with them and quell situations before they get out of hand. I've been with it 15 years, so I've seen the growth. Humbly, I've seen the success where now Cure Violence, the model itself, is being operated roughly around 61 sites, 25 cities throughout the United States, and as well as working abroad. I've had the opportunity to see the Cure Violence model implemented in places like South Africa, where I helped start and train their team, and they saw a reduction of upward of 50% reduction in their community. Countries like Trinidad, where I also worked for the last 3 years, where we implemented there, and Arizona State just did the evaluation on the progress there, and they saw a 46% reduction in violence. And in the United States, I'll use New York as an example, because most recently John Jay College evaluated a Cure Violence model in Brooklyn and one in the Bronx, and they saw tremendous success as well. So in a nutshell, that's what Cure Violence is about, is trying to intervene and interrupt the cycle of violence by using those most acclimated and most credible from that community to be the ones to intervene in that particular situation.
So what's one of your proudest outcome measures in the city of Chicago?
Oh, quite a bit. I mean, and one thing that we don't never see in the news. I mean, obviously Chicago gets a rap of, we have so much violence, but the news has never taken the opportunity to really say, well, in the areas where Cure Violence is replicated at, we don't see the uptick as the rest of the city is seeing. We're at our highest capacity of working, we were only in 25%. That number has dropped, meaning the amount of sites that we have in our own backyard where this particular model started. And I really don't have an answer other than, and I'm no offense to anybody because I'm a very spiritual person, but it's almost like a prophet has no honor in his own backyard. I mean, we to be replicated all over the country, for people to call on us. I was just in Jacksonville, Florida. They're about to do this model. I got calls with St. Louis. We're launching in all over this country. But in Chicago, it's been bittersweet because of the funding issues and a variety of reasons why violence has spiked when we didn't have sites, and it's went down tremendously. But sites have gone, hundreds or plus days without a shooting or homicide where the program's at.
That's what we're looking for. So you heard our Commissioner of Health, Jeanette, talk about violence as a public health concern. So Dr. Malia, I'd like you, as a member of the Medical College of Wisconsin and the trauma physician at Frederick, if you talk a little bit about what happens in your arena when you see violence in terms of your workforce and also with the families.
All right, thank you very much. Like I said, I'm Dr. Millie. I'm the medical director of the Level 1 trauma program over at Frederick. Milwaukee is also home to another level trauma program, a Level 1 program over at Children's Hospital. We're nationally recognized fantastic trauma programs who are very good at doing what we do. But trauma is a biopsychosocial disease. There are three wheels of the tricycle, and we're really good at nailing the biology of trauma. We're excellent at stopping the bleeding, restoring physiology, and getting our patients out of the hospital alive at a higher and higher percentage than ever before. As far as the psychology of trauma, we actually are fortunate enough to have Dr. Darun Cassini, who's with us today, as a nationally recognized trauma psychologist who's really spearheading a lot of the research on post-traumatic stress disorder and getting our patients at least some of the psychological help that they need following their traumatic events. However, we're sending our patients home with only two wheels of a tricycle. we really, as physicians and as psychologists, have no way to impact the social aspect of trauma. And we within the hospital system are kind of in a silo where we've been separate from the city and separate from what's really going on the streets at the root of the trauma. And we've really been handicapped. And we know this. We see time and time again our patients who have been shot 1, 2, 3, 4 times coming back to see us. And we know when we send them out of the hospital all patched up that they're going to come back. The biggest risk factor for getting shot, unfortunately, is having been shot in the past, and there's really not much we can do about that in the hospital. In fact, about 1 in 5 patients who are a victim of a homicide have actually been shot within the past 5 years. And we know this as providers. There's nothing that we can do about that. And so what does that do for us? It just adds a lot of stress. You know, we spend countless hours taking care of patients, honing our craft, and researching everything that we do, but there's just not much we can do once we send people back out on the street and home.
So speaking of aspects to prevention, one of the programs that has been started in this area is violence interrupters. And so Derek, as the program leader of 414 Life, would you like to talk a little bit about what's going on in the Garden Homes neighborhood that you got started in 2018? And then we'll talk to a couple of the interrupters to address the very issue that we just heard about.
Right, absolutely. I just wanted to make the point. Well, first of all, good afternoon. I just wanted to make the point that there's 3 components to the Cure Violence model that 414 Life is attempting to implement here in the city and make it indigenous to the city. Basically, interrupting the transmission of violence or of gun violence. Then there's the treatment aspect, dealing with individuals who are at highest risk for violence and making sure that they're receiving support and therapeutic methods. And then the third piece is changing the norms around violence. So fundamentally, that's the basis of the work that we do. What we've begun to do since we began actually in early November was to basically map the community that is our target area. Mapping the community meaning introducing ourselves, getting to know where the hot spots of conflict are, understanding what the nature of our target area is in terms of who's there, where who are the individuals, organizations, cliques, whatever it may be in those neighborhoods who have the highest potential for violence, and then having our staff build relationships in those areas. The relationships are able to be built because the staff that we have are credible, committed, and courageous. And because of some of their previous experience, they're able to build networks and relationships with individuals who are at the highest risk for violence. And then that allows for the work to occur. So in terms of interruptions, situations, and I'll just talk about some of the situations. When you're talking about situations possibly involving drugs, social media, squabbles, incidents in and outside of schools, our interrupters have been able to anticipate events or possible conflicts that were going to occur, potential conflicts, and interrupt or come in terms of conflict mediation in many of those situations. We've had since November 26 what we would consider to be interruptions that have occurred that could potentially have been serious gun violence. In addition to that, our outreach workers have built a caseload of individuals, again, who are high risk, meaning there are a number of factors that make individuals high risk for either being a shooter or being shot. And building relationships with those individuals, having them as part of their caseloads, and building relationships and making sure that they're getting resources that help them, educational resources, housing, employment, therapy. So that's the direction that we've moved in thus far. And then finally, I would just want to say that we've had we've begun some of the impact inside of the schools. If you didn't know, oftentimes it's not necessarily violence that comes into the schools, but depending on the way some schools are structured, violence can be bred from within the school, and the need to go in and work with some of the young people who are in climates where that violence has already started to fester. So we've begun some educational pieces inside of schools that we term restoration of consciousness, that we go in and our outreach workers are doing work with individuals in the schools.
So I think it's fair to say from a public health perspective, the first thing you want to do is prevent, right? Absolutely. And so that's what you're working on. And can you talk to us a little bit about how you've been accepted by the neighbors, the business owners, particularly in the Garden Homes area?
Very, very well accepted. There was some work that had gone on prior to our arriving in the neighborhood, but we have worked very diligently to develop coalitions with block associations, neighborhood associations, and particularly with individuals who were already doing the work relative to gun violence prevention in those neighborhoods, working with them. The neighbors and the neighborhood are looking for answers and looking for solutions. So they've been very welcome. We've made sure that coming in to this area, we're not coming in like, hey, we're taking over, hey, we have all the answers, but just looking to support things that are already being done and provide some alternative means of dealing with some of the situations they're dealing with in their neighborhoods.
Very nice. So Ray and Tania, you are violence interrupters. And so would one of you like to talk a little bit about what that means and what you do in that particular role in the community?
Hello, thank you guys for having us here. I'll speak to my particular role. And as an interrupter and a hospital respondent, I particularly work with family advocacy. That's really one of the factors that Reggie spoke to with the Blueprint for Peace. And in that, I'll cite one of the families that I worked with. You guys may have been familiar with the Sandra Parks, the 13-year-old young lady who was shot in her home back in November. That was approximately 2 weeks after we got started with this program. And it was a very tragic situation that affected a lot of individuals in our community, the youth and the families and the schools. And I can honestly say that I'm a mother. I have 2 daughters. And when you think of being inside of your home, that's a place of serenity, a place of peace. You would want and expect to feel safe. This young lady was in her room with her family, her mother and her brother, and was shot and actually died in her home. So her mother had to witness her child say, "Mom, I'm shot, I'm hit." And that's like the biggest fear as a parent. Like you don't even think about that. Like, you know, you can't even fathom such a situation. So for me, immediately I felt the mother's pain and what would I want or what do I feel that I would need in being in a position like that. And so once we learned about it, we went to the vigil that they had for Sandra and introduced myself and a team member to her, let her know what the initiative was about, let her know that we were here as a support. If she needed anything, we would be available to assist her. In that whole process, again, it was very traumatic for her as well as ourselves. The whole entire team, it's a team of 10 of us. We tried our best to support her from A to Z. From the wake, I went with her and I supported her intimately. So from the time she went to the wake to view the body, and that was very, very difficult. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about it as I'm speaking, so forgive me. But situations like that is why we need to work together collectively, because just because it happened to her, it can happen to any one of us at any point in time. So the reason why I do this work and why I'm excited about this is because it's different. It's a collaborative effort with the community, with the hospitals being involved, with Freighter, with Ascension, with this organization, and all of the multiple people, the mayor and the councilman, everyone being a part of understanding and really saying that this is a problem and an issue that we need to come together collectively with. We're seeing a great difference. The mom was very receptive to us, and she appreciates the support. We're still engaged with her right now, working, trying to assist her with finding housing to get her removed from that home. That is one of the challenges that we face. And that goes back to funding, because there aren't any resources available for tragic situations that happen immediately, that you don't have any resources right now readily available. So that's one of the challenges that I feel like I faced, and not feeling like we failed, but feeling like there's nothing available to offer that family to complete. And we did take major steps. We reached out to Mayor Barrett's office. Marcy had been working with her in multiple community organizations, but that family is in there, and she's still kind of re-traumatized by that. But overall, we supported her in every which way, from the vigil to the funeral to support services at the balloon release, everything that we could possibly think of doing.
Well, and you mentioned the effect on you as an individual, and I know that happens in our emergency departments, and one of the things we all talk about is teaching people about trauma-informed care, because it's as much about learning about the issues that led up to the trauma, but also to take care of the caregivers, people like yourself that are in the situation, because it's very trauma is pervasive. It affects all of us in many different ways. And so, again, we've got to do as good of a job taking care of the caregivers as we do the families, so that we can develop the resiliency in the caregivers. So, Roy, would you like to tell us about a personal example of a situation that you've been involved in that really talks a lot about the role as the interrupter?
Well, good afternoon. I have a special interest in this work because I have an extensive connection to the streets, and I have the opportunity to go in and talk to guys that are actively involved in the streets and are actively considered to be potential shooters or to get shot just by the lifestyle they live. And I happen to have a lot of respect from the guys in the streets. So I'm able to go in and target individuals that I know are living a certain lifestyle that I can talk to and try to convince them to change the method of thinking and their ideas of what their future should be, coming from my experiences. So I happened to call on a guy that I knew that I was checking up on, and he was upset. And he said, "Man, I need to talk to you." And I said, "Okay, well, where are you?" He says, I'm in traffic." I said, "Well, I'm in traffic too. Where you at?" He says, I'm over here on 27th, and he was around like Beach or area, somewhere around there. I said, "Well, meet me on 16th and Mitchell." So we met on 16th and Mitchell, and I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Man, look, this dude owes me some money. He don't want to pay me. Every time I see him, he takes off. I just got in a high-speed chase with him. He had another dude with him. I know I can't beat both of them, so I really want to shoot him." So, "Well, sit down, man. Let's talk about this." I said, "How much money does he owe you?" She said, "Not a lot." I said, "All right, well, I mean, whatever the amount is, how does that justify you ending up in prison? How does that justify you potentially getting killed if they shoot back? How does that justify you killing him for a small amount of money?" You got to think about the outcomes of your actions. I said, "So just, let me talk to him," because I knew the other guy too. So let me talk to him and see if I can get this settled for you. I said, "You might not get all your money, but if I can get you back some of it, are you happy with that?" He said, "Man, give me something, man. Just have him show me that he is willing to do something." I said, "All right, well, give me a couple days." He said, "All right, so man, but you got to promise me. If you see him, you're not going to say nothing. You're not going to do nothing. You're just going to walk away from him." He said, "Man," I said, "Man, listen, this is me. Promise me that if you see this guy, you're not going to do nothing." He said, "I promise." I said, "Thank you." So I met with the other guy, and I said, "Hey, you owe this guy this amount of money. How we gonna settle this?" He said, "Man, all I got is this much." I said, "Let me get it. I'm gonna go take it to him. The beef is gonna be dead." He said, "Man, you sure?" I said, "I just told you the beef is gonna be dead. I'll give you my word." He says, "Okay." He gave me the money, called the other guy. "Where you at?" "I'm over here. I'm right here. Here's your money. It's dead." He said, "It's dead." I said, "Thank you." And that was it. It's just that simple. When you got the respect of people on the streets, and you got them to get them to understand that whatever actions they want to play are not worth it, and you can come up with a solution that makes everybody happy, That's what we do. The goal here is to stop people from getting shot and stop people from going to prison for shooting somebody. Neither one is fun. I've been shot and I've been to prison. Neither one is fun. I did 17 years in federal prison. I did 17 years in federal prison. I got a 20-year sentence. I did 10 years for attempted murder, 10 years for kidnapping. I think I'm a credible worker out here. I was in charge of a lot of guys. I think I'm credible. So if people with backgrounds like mine are willing to go out there in the streets and work with these guys and step into the fire with these guys, I'm not afraid. I was born one day to die another. But I'd rather die helping somebody than hurting somebody.
Very nice. Thank you.
So I put every effort that I have to talk to these guys, whether I know them or not. I talk to them like I know them. I talk to them like I've been around them their entire life, and I treat them with the respect that they deserve. And I try to teach them that there's a better way of living in order to live. These guys aren't living. These guys have been experiencing trauma since young ages. You know, the lead in the water plays a big part in how these guys are growing up and the trauma that they're feeling and the things that and their actions, that plays a big role in that. So the mental health aspect of it is a no-brainer. Without dealing with that, we're never going to solve this problem. We're never going to get to zero. It's never going to be zero for a year. But if we can lower it every year, a little bit at a time, I think we're winning.
So you make a really good point of the effects on the brain of unresolved trauma. So one of the things we know in kids is that if kids have a high adverse childhood event score over 4 for a long period of time, by age 7, their brains change and their fight and flight overdeveloped, their judgment and reason underdeveloped. And so when you think about these kids that end up in juvenile justice, a lot of times it's just not their fault, but they've been in these unresolved traumatic situations where they've experienced much of the things that happen in our community. And so their reactions are very different than kids that grow up in different loving, nurturing, safe communities. So it's an important issue, and thanks so much for sharing your story. I meet people where they are, and I'm sure your credibility out in the street is pretty darn high, given that you've been through it, you've been there, done it, and it's about personal relationships. So we have time for a couple of questions. If anybody'd like to ask our panelists. Betsy?
Who are entering that cycle, who want the help, who don't want to become juvenile justice cases, what kind of treatment do you deal with at a very young age for these kids?
Well, from my perspective, we as a group, we've come to the realization that you got to ask them what they want in their life. You can't tell them what they want. You can't talk to the kids. You can't talk at the kids. You got to listen to them. Yeah. So you got to let them talk. And when they tell you what it is that they want to do, then we look for the avenues to get them where they want to go. We're there to support them and to guide them where they want to go. It's up to them to make up their mind on what they want to do with their life. And we're just there to help them get there.
Well, the most important thing is to understand the environment that they've been exposed to and what's leading to the situation that would give them a high ACE score, and then put the community services together that actually start to intervene. And so one of the programs we have at Children's is called Project Ujima. We see about 400 kids a year that come to our emergency department who have been either shot, stabbed, victims of violence. So we, while they're in the emergency department, have a team of individuals that actually respond to the event right there. And then we start to really work with the families to get them out of the situations that led to them being victimized in the first place. Because it's very important that, as Jeanette said, the social determinants of health, there's so many other things that impact your health and your health outcome other than just your physical conditions. And so the most important thing is meet people where they're at, find out what led up to the situation that they're in, and then try to do everything, whether it's housing, whether it's schools, food stability, all those other things that really do impact that development of a child so they can grow up to be the healthiest kids in Wisconsin. We have one more question. Who go?
So I think really all of them a real big round of applause. You mentioned earlier about sites, and I apologize if I missed it when Reggie were talking. Could you talk? Two-part question: Do we have enough sites in Milwaukee? Because it seems like that's what you were mentioning in Chicago. That was really important. The number of sites that you had, and what do we do to need to help grow the number of sites? And then secondly, just looking from a business owner standpoint, a lot of the chambers that we're involved in, we want to make ourselves more visible. You know, if you're in a community, if you're in the inner city, and all you see is crime, you know, that $50 might be really important to you if you never had a mentor, if you never had somebody who can, you know, show you a bigger picture. So we're trying to get ourselves more involved, going to the inner city schools. That's something that we're doing through several chambers that I'm involved. What else can we do as business owners and obviously financing and funding is important, but what else can we do to get involved and to support the great work that you're doing on a daily basis? So two-part question. I don't know if Reggie, if you want to grab the first one.
Yeah. Do you want to answer that?
What do you want to answer? Okay.
All right. So the first part of your question, ideally we would want to get to at least 3 sites in the city. So we're looking at the east side in terms of Harambe, and then we're also looking at the near south side. So that's where our aim is by 2021. If we can get there sooner, that would be great, but that's the ideal. And then in terms of partnering with the business community and bids, that's extremely important. So that is something that we're open to doing because I think it speaks to the environment. And one of the things that we talk about in the Office of Violence Prevention is violence is bad for business, it's bad for the city, it's bad for families, it's bad for neighborhoods. So the degree that we can work together to that aim would be critically important. Did I miss any of your questions?
Yeah, that's really
good question. So a site optimally is $500,000, so $500,000 per site, and that's for a full-time team.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we need to amp it up, but we've been working, with Ms. Taylor here as well as the Greater Milwaukee Foundation in trying to raise private dollars, but we definitely want to do that more aggressively this year.
Can I just touch on something with what they said right there? I think it's important, and I kind of always touch on this wherever I go in doing this work, because I was a violence interrupter myself. I was an outreach worker. I was a program manager, just like Ray myself. Found myself incarcerated at 18 years old, got 10 years in jail, etc. But here's the thing that I want to mention, and I mentioned this before when I had some early opportunities to come here to Milwaukee on Miss Julia Taylor and Reggie and them had me down here when we were really pushing to get this thing going. And I want to stress it to this crowd here, is that the one thing that's not so much part of our model, but it happens organically, is the fact that not only, so I like the idea of having 2 more sites or 4 or 5, whatever, because not only is it stopping the violence, it's giving an opportunity to people like Ray, Tania. It gave me an opportunity. And so that's big to me. And as community members and business people and elected officials, you should look at it as a double prong. Yeah, they're going to stop the violence because that's what they do. They're from the neighborhood, but you're giving an opportunity, a chance to individuals to work in your neighborhood. And we're not picking people up from other cities, from their backyard. And they are becoming the change that the streets they need to see that. That's why we hire people that have been through stuff, credible messengers. That's why we're not really trying to find a way, well, how can we make this program work with people straight out of college? This thing is the MBA for us. This is something that we want to do to give back, and we're not really trying to figure out a way of, well, how could you do that without people without backgrounds? Because it's the individuals with backgrounds that have been through something that's going to inspire one of them young people to say, hey, if they could do it, we could do it. I mean, we sit up here today and we're talking to you and stuff, but we were just like them. We were out there. We were doing things. And so I think that's always big to understand. So I look at it now, they got a team of 10. Hey, let's get 2 more sites and have 30 individuals that are from Milwaukee that might have thought that their life was done. Not so much just what they're saving on the streets, but sometimes we give up on the young people. We also give up on the ones that been through stuff, that got a background or a record. Where Cure Violence, and the way this thing was set up, is to give them an opportunity to be professional, to change. I mean, I always say this, and I'm going to end it at this. I never would have thought we'd be on any panel. I'm sure Ray say the same thing, sitting up here talking to you all, and mayors in the building, and commissioners, and sitting next to a doctor. It's an honor, I tell you that. But it's not the cup of tea that we thought we would be doing in our life. But God has a way of making things right. So this is really good work, and I just applaud the team for doing it.
Thanks.
So I want to thank all of you for coming today and listening to this program. We don't live in the environment with this kind of rampant violence, but it's important for all of us to understand it. As Reggie said, it's obviously bad for the people that are part of it, whether they're the victim or the perpetrator. It's bad for business. It's bad for the image of our city, particularly with the DNC coming here. So I want to thank all the panelists for your skills, your knowledge, your bravery in doing what you're doing, and for your work in improving the lives of the citizens of our city. Thank you. Thank you, Reggie, Jeanette, Peggy. So that concludes our program, and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you.